Here's the question I had to ask myself early on. Why do some people struggle their entire life just to survive, while others seem to design lives filled with abundance, peace, and purpose? What separates the two isn't just education. It's not luck. It's not even money. It's mindset. The wealthy don't just do different things, they think different thoughts. And from those thoughts flow beliefs, and from those beliefs flow decisions, and from those decisions flows wealth. Not instantly, but inevitably. So tonight I want to talk to you about the most valuable real estate you'll ever own, the space between your ears. If you never learn to invest there, the world out here will stay expensive. If you never clean the weeds in that garden, your life will grow wild and not in a good way. Wealth is not something you chase, it's something you attract by becoming a certain kind of person. And to become that kind of person, you have to learn to think wealthy long before you ever act wealthy. You must become wealthy in philosophy before you ever become wealthy in numbers. So let's talk about it. Not just money, but mindset. Not just income, but identity. The secret is simple, but it is not easy. Because the hardest thing to master is not the economy, it's your own thinking. Let's begin. Now, I've met people who think money is the answer, so they spend all their time chasing it, switching jobs, starting something new every few months, or running after every shiny opportunity. And guess what? They stay broke. Because they never stop to ask, who am I becoming in the process? The wealthy didn't become wealthy because they got lucky, number. They became valuable first. They built patience. They built communication skills. They learned how to lead, how to manage, how to think long term. And the money came as a response to that internal growth. When I started in business, I wasn't attracting much, not in income, not in opportunity. But then my mentor said something that stuck with me. If you want to have more, you must become more. That hit me. I stopped asking for better pay and started asking how to become a better person. I read every book I could find. I worked harder on myself than on my business. Slowly things changed. Not because the world got easier, but because I got stronger. You see, success is something you prepare for, and preparation is internal before it's ever external. The mirror is your starting line. So don't ask for a raise in income, ask for a raise in character. Don't chase opportunity, become someone. Opportunity can't ignore, because you don't get what you want, you get what you are. And wealth will always find its way to someone who has built himself into someone worthy of it. So if you want to attract more, first become more. Let me tell you something that may sound simple on the surface, but cuts deep when you reflect on it. Your habits are a preview of your future. You want to know what someone's bank account will look like in 5 years? Watch how they spend their mornings. Watch how they spend $1. Watch what they do when no one's watching. It's not the big decisions that shape financial destiny. It's the small, repeated behaviors, done daily, often without applause or recognition. Wealthy people don't live by moods, they live by systems. While the average person waits to feel motivated to act, the wealthy have built habits that act whether motivation is present or not. And that's the difference. You don't need more inspiration, you need more structure. You don't rise to the level of your dreams, you fall to the level of your disciplines. Now, I remember a time when I'd wake up and let the day tell me what to do. I'd react to life instead of building it. Then I learned to start my morning with intention, reading something that sharpened my thinking, reviewing my goals, writing down what I spent. Little disciplines. But done every day, they started to transform my thinking. And when the mind transforms, the wallet follows. A budget, for example, isn't just about managing money. It's about managing mindset. It's a signal that you are taking control. And reading, it's not just knowledge, it's nourishment. Feeding the mind every day is as important as feeding the body, because your financial reality will never rise above your mental capacity. And service well. Wealthy people know that serving others is what brings value. And value is what money chases. See, the person who gets wealthy isn't always the most gifted. It's the one who has learned to repeat the right behaviors, rain or shine, tired or energized, applauded or ignored. Consistency is the great equalizer. Talent may open the door, but habits keep it open. So look at your habits, not just your hopes. Are they aligned with wealth? Do they serve the future or just the present moment? Because if you want to change the outcome, you must change the input. Your habits are not just routines. They are the architects of your future wealth. I've always believed that what we tolerate becomes our lifestyle. And nowhere is that more evident than in our financial lives. You see, the small compromises we make, the just this once decisions, the things we let slide, they aren't neutral. They're setting the tone. If you tolerate financial mess, soon it becomes normal. And what's normal? We stop questioning. I've met people who were brilliant, hardworking, full of potential, but they always seem to be running in place financially. Why? Because they tolerated habits that kept them stuck. They tolerated the high interest debt. They tolerated subscriptions they didn't use. They tolerated eating out 5 nights a week while claiming they couldn't afford to save. And slowly, their tolerance became their identity. Let me tell you, I used to be that man. I used to say it's not that bad, until one day I realized that not that bad was costing me my goals. See, the moment you start justifying mediocrity, you give it permission to stay. I had to raise my financial standards, not for others, not to impress, but because I couldn't keep betraying my future for momentary comfort. You want change? Raise the floor, not just the ceiling. Decide that certain things are simply no longer acceptable. Not another month of overdraft fees. Not another year without an emergency fund. Not another paycheck that disappears without a trace. When you stop tolerating lack, waste, and disorganization, you make room for clarity, progress, and wealth. And it's not just about money, it's about mindset. Because if you tolerate laziness in finances, chances are you're tolerating it in your health, your relationships, your goals. Everything is connected. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. So if you raise your standards in one area, the others start to follow. Discipline begins the moment you stop saying it's fine and start saying this must change. Wealth doesn't respond to intention, it responds to standards. The world doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you accept. So raise what you accept, and the numbers will follow. I learned early on that the moment you let someone else think for you, you also give them permission to shape your results. And when it comes to money, that's a dangerous trade. You see, most people don't go broke because they lack effort. They go broke because they outsource their thinking. They listen to headlines, trends, gossip, and broke opinions, and they start making financial decisions based on noise instead of wisdom. I've watched smart men and women hand over their judgment to the loudest voice in the room. They buy things because someone on social media said it was a good idea. They invest because their cousin did. They spend because it feels right, not because it aligns with a plan. But remember this, if you let other people do your thinking, you'll also inherit their lifestyle. And if they're broke, confused, or aimless, you'll end up in the same boat, just wearing different clothes. You have to take back your mind. Build it like you would build wealth, deliberately, consistently, and with discipline. Read the books. Study the trends. Understand the fundamentals. When I was broke, I didn't just try to make more money. I tried to make better decisions. And better decisions require better thinking. Thinking is work. That's why most people avoid it. But the wealthy, they think long and hard. They evaluate risk, not just reward. They question everything, including their own assumptions. And most importantly, they never let someone else's urgency become their emergency. They act from strategy, not pressure. A man once asked me, "Should I invest in this opportunity?" I said, "Well, what do you know about it?" He shrugged. I said, "Then no. Don't invest until you've invested in your understanding." That's a principle. Don't make decisions you haven't thought through. Don't build your life with borrowed opinions. Wealth begins with clarity of thought, and clarity doesn't come from noise, it comes from time alone with truth. So take back your mind, sharpen it like a tool, and let it guide your steps, not someone else's voice. Because when you do your own thinking, you build your own wealth. I've met people who could light up a room with their charisma, who could speak with confidence, who walked tall, smiled big, and sounded like they knew exactly where they were going. But peel back the layers, and what you often find is that behind the confidence, there's no competence, no depth, no mastery, no skill that produces real value. And let me tell you, in the marketplace, that kind of confidence is not an asset, it's a liability. The world might applaud charm for a moment, but it pays for results. And results only come from competence. Confidence can open a door, but competence is what keeps you in the room. Without skill, belief becomes a bluff. And the marketplace has a funny way of calling your bluff when you least expect it. I've seen people land the opportunity because they were bold, but lose it just as fast because they weren't ready. You have to do the work. You can't skip the grind. The wealthy don't just believe in themselves, they earn that belief by building real skill. They train when others sleep. They study when others scroll. They rehearse, refine, review, and repeat. Confidence grows stronger when it's rooted in real preparation. And the world begins to believe in you when you've put in the hours no one else sees. I remember when I was young and full of hope, trying to sell big ideas without knowing how to back them up. I thought if I just looked the part and sounded right, things would fall into place. But they didn't not until I made a decision to become valuable. I read the books. I learned the craft. I paid the price of preparation. And only then did my confidence start to produce fruit in the real world. Don't just talk a big game train for it. Make your confidence earn its place by being paired with competence. Because when belief meets skill, it becomes unstoppable. The world doesn't just need dreamers, it needs doers. So become both, and then watch what happens when your confidence finally has the strength to stand on its own. I've always believed that the difference between a wealthy person and a broke one starts with a single thought. It's not the size of their wallet, it's the size of their thinking. Scarcity and abundance are not just economic conditions, they're deeply rooted mindsets. Most people don't realize that they've chosen scarcity. Not actively, but passively, with the phrases they speak and the questions they ask themselves every day. You hear it all the time. I can't afford that. People like me don't get those chances. Money doesn't grow on trees. And while that last one might be true in the literal sense, the real tragedy is how those words shape a person's entire financial philosophy. Because every time you say, I can't, your mind stops working. It closes the door on creativity. It shuts down the very engine that could have driven you to a solution. And so you sit stuck not by reality but by thought. But when you start asking, how can I afford that? Something powerful happens. You ignite a spark of curiosity. You stir up problem-solving energy. You begin to see opportunities where there used to be walls. And that's the shift from scarcity to abundance. Not through lottery wins or miracle checks, but through thinking, through asking better questions. I remember a time when I wanted to attend a seminar I couldn't afford. My first instinct was to say, well, maybe next year. But then I caught myself and asked, how can I make this happen? That one question led me to make a few extra sales calls, rearrange my budget, and get creative. And you know what happened? I made it. And that seminar gave me ideas that returned tenfold what I spent to be there. Abundance is not about having it all right now. It's about believing it's possible, then going to work to create it. It's about training your mind to seek solutions instead of surrendering to limits. You don't have to accept scarcity as your story. You can rewrite the script. Start with a better question and watch your reality begin to shift. Because fortune doesn't just favor the bold, it favors the thinker who refuses to settle for lack. Most people misunderstand what it means to act wealthy. They think it's the flashy car, the designer suit, the five-star dinners. But let me tell you, that kind of acting is a performance, not a principle. Real wealth doesn't scream. It plans, it thinks ahead, it sacrifices now for greater reward later. You see, acting wealthy isn't about spending big, it's about thinking long term. I've seen broke people drive luxury cars and wealthy people drive old trucks. The difference isn't what's parked in the driveway, it's what's parked in the mind. One is trying to impress the world, the other's trying to build a world worth living in. And you don't build anything lasting with short-term thinking. When you think long-term, you start to behave differently. You budget, not out of fear, but out of purpose. You say no to the impulse and yes to the investment. You begin to see your time as a resource, not just something to kill. That's the wealth mindset. It's strategic, it's intentional, and it's rare. I remember a young man who came up to me after a seminar, decked out in the finest clothes, asking me how to become a millionaire. I asked him what he was investing in. He said, "Nothing right now, I'm still paying off this watch." I smiled, not to mock him, but to remind him. If you look rich before you are rich, you'll likely stay poor pretending. But if you think rich, think long-term, think wisely, think intentionally, wealth begins to find you. True wealth is quiet. It's built in the early mornings, in the books you read, in the habits you form, in the decisions nobody claps for. It's when you choose ownership over impulse, legacy over luxury, and vision over vanity. And ironically, those who think long-term often end up living a lifestyle that outlasts the showboats because their fortune was rooted, not just displayed. So next time you're tempted to spend to look wealthy, stop. Ask yourself if it builds your future or just burns your present. The world doesn't need to see it. You need to become it. That's real wealth. Words shape worlds. You listen to yourself more than you listen to anyone else. And the way you speak not just to others, but especially to yourself, begins to construct the emotional and financial architecture of your life. That's why poor language leads to a poor life. If you constantly say, "I can't afford it," money is evil, people like me never get ahead, you've already chained your future to limitation. You've spoken scarcity into existence. You've placed yourself in a mental prison, locked by your own vocabulary. I remember a man who always said, "I'm just trying to survive." That became his story. Every choice he made was to survive, never to thrive. Survival thinking doesn't create wealth. It protects crumbs, it doesn't build feasts. I asked him one day to change his words to say, "I'm learning how to thrive." That one shift changed what he read, who he talked to, and how he showed up. Language rewired his mindset, and mindset restructured his reality. The wealthy speak differently, not with arrogance, but with authority. They say things like, "I'm figuring it out. I take full responsibility. Let's find a solution." Those words open doors. Those words create movement. Those words invite opportunity. The language of wealth isn't about showing off. It's about speaking from a place of clarity, confidence, and growth. Even in tough times, the wealthy say, "This is temporary," or "What's the lesson here?" That's what keeps their direction forward, not backward. And here's what I've learned. You don't need to be rich to talk like the wealthy. You just need to decide that your words will no longer work against your future. That you'll catch yourself when the old language creeps in. That you'll speak not according to where you are, but where you're going. Because your mouth is the steering wheel of your life, and if you don't direct it, you'll drift. So listen closely to your own speech. Are you building your life with power or weakening it with complaint? Start using the words of responsibility, not excuses. The words of potential, not limitation. Because before money grows in your account, wealth must first grow in your mouth. Speak wisely, your future is listening. Most people spend their lives chasing money like it's a finish line, always running, always grasping, always just out of reach. But money, when you really understand it, doesn't respond to pursuit. It responds to value. It doesn't flow to those who want it the most. It flows to those who earn it by solving problems that matter. I've seen people hustle tirelessly, running from one opportunity to the next, always looking for the big hit. And yet, they never pause to ask the real question, what problem do I solve? Because the marketplace doesn't care how badly you want to be rich. It rewards service, contribution, usefulness. If you want to make more money, stop asking, how do I make more money? And start asking, whose life can I improve? That's the real secret. Find a need, fill it, do it well, then do it better. And when it works, scale it. Now, solving problems doesn't always mean inventing the next big thing. It might mean delivering something faster, making it easier, improving customer experience, or simply being more consistent than others. I knew a man who cleaned windows. He didn't invent a new window cleaner, but he showed up early, smiled, remembered his clients' birthdays, and left every window spotless. He charged a little more than the rest, and people paid gladly. Why? Because he solved the problem better than most. You must understand this. Every dollar in your pocket came from someone else's hand and they gave it to you because in that moment, you solved something for them. That is business in its purest form. And wealth? Wealth is just the long-term result of solving meaningful problems at scale. So stop chasing the payout. Chase usefulness. Study human needs. Get obsessed with serving, not scheming. If you want to become a millionaire, don't get distracted by the money. Focus on becoming a person who creates so much value that money becomes the byproduct. You don't get rich by wishing, waiting, or working randomly. You get rich by identifying a problem, mastering your craft, and delivering your solution with excellence over and over again. Solve better problems and you'll never have to chase money again. It will start chasing you. When I first started out, I didn't know much about money. I didn't grow up with it, and I certainly didn't have a manual for how to earn it, manage it, or multiply it. But I'll tell you what changed my trajectory. It wasn't just reading books or attending seminars. It was getting around people who thought differently about money. People who were wealthy, not just in dollars, but in discipline, in vision, in values. Being in their presence shifted something in me. Their conversations were different. Their habits were intentional. Their standards were high. And being around that kind of energy pulled me up. Association is acceleration. If you want to know where your life is headed, take a look at your 5 closest relationships. Are they building or draining? Are they dreaming or doubting? Are they investing or spending? You rise to the level of your circle, whether you're aware of it or not. Get around people who normalize wealth, who treat financial wisdom like a non-negotiable. You'll find yourself learning without being taught, growing without being forced, and evolving without being asked. You don't need people who will pat you on the back for staying the same. You need people who challenge your excuses, who question your spending, who remind you of your goals when you forget. Wealthy people think in terms of legacy, strategy, and systems, not paychecks, weekends, or winning the lottery. And when you're around that kind of clarity, your own confusion starts to dissolve. Your own doubts begin to shrink. I remember a moment early on sitting in a room with a few self-made millionaires. They weren't flashy. In fact, most of them were quieter than the broke folks I knew. But when they spoke, you listened. They didn't talk about problems. They talked about solutions. They didn't blame the economy. They adjusted their strategies. And they didn't dwell on the past. They built toward the future. That was the kind of thinking I needed. Not noise, but clarity. Not drama, but discipline. So, choose your circle with care. Because when you walk with people who are serious about financial growth, you start making serious changes. Your thinking matures. Your standards rise. Your results accelerate. And that's when wealth begins to feel inevitable. I learned early on that the road to wealth isn't paved with perfect conditions. It's shaped by how you respond when the conditions aren't perfect. And for most people, that's where it falls apart. Because you can have the right plan, the right opportunity, even the right timing. But if you don't have control over your emotions, you'll sabotage it all. That's why I always say, wealthy people master their emotions not because they're emotionless, but because they refuse to be ruled by them. See, fear is real. It shows up when the market dips. It whispers when you think about launching that business. It lingers when you take a risk. But fear should inform you, not control you. Wealthy people use fear as a prompt to prepare, to study, to build margins. But they don't let fear lock them in the same place for years. They move forward, even when it's uncomfortable, because they've trained their emotional muscles to support their decisions, not sabotage them. And then there's envy, one of the most subtle destroyers of wealth. It doesn't scream, it nags. It shows up when you see someone else winning, and instead of being inspired, you start comparing. But envy drains energy that could be used to build. Wealthy people don't waste time being jealous. They're too focused on growing. They understand that someone else's success isn't a threat, it's proof. Proof that wealth is possible. That's a mindset shift. I remember a time when I lost a major deal. I was frustrated, even embarrassed. But I learned that emotional discipline in failure is just as important as emotional discipline in success. Because if you throw in the towel every time it gets rough, the towel becomes your identity. But if you stay calm, if you process the pain and keep moving, wealth starts to trust you. And you know what else? Wealthy people don't chase emotional highs with purchases. They're not buying to impress or to escape. They buy with purpose. They invest with strategy. Because when your emotions are stable, your money decisions become intelligent. It's not about being cold, it's about being clear. So, if you want to grow your finances, grow your emotional discipline. Because the mind that manages emotion well manages money even better. Thinking like the wealthy costs you nothing. You don't need a single dollar to start. You don't need connections or a big break to begin thinking correctly. That's the good news. The mind is free territory and everyone has access. But here's the truth most never come to terms with. While wealthy thinking is free, acting on that thinking will cost you. It'll cost you comfort. It'll cost you old habits. It may cost you friendships that no longer align with your values. It may even cost you some short-term pleasures. But make no mistake, the price of action is the down payment on transformation. Now, I've met many people who talk like millionaires. They quote wisdom, read the right books, even post inspirational ideas on their wall. They sound like success, but when you look at their daily life, there's no follow-through, no systems, no urgency, just good intentions. And intentions, while noble, never built a fortune. Belief without execution is like a seed left on the shelf. It has potential, but no harvest. Wealthy people separate themselves not by what they know, but by what they do with what they know. When they learn a principle, they apply it. When they recognize a weakness, they work on it. When they see opportunity, they act, even if the timing isn't perfect. That's the real dividing line. It's not talent, it's not luck, it's courage to move. Action is what takes a wealthy mindset from the clouds and anchors it to the earth. You see, the bridge between mindset and money is movement. If you learn about investing but never invest, you stay stuck. If you understand the power of discipline but never develop habits, you remain a dreamer. It's not knowledge that changes lives, it's applied knowledge. You want to change your life? Then you must do what others won't. Wake up earlier, study harder, delay gratification, start the business, and cut the excuses.